Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled, the audio hub for parents going through the teenage years. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters.
Hi there, I'm Susie Asley, mindfulness coach, mindful therapist, musician and mother of 3 teenagers, 2 of them are twins.
Now, Susie, there's been so much in the news that impacts on being a parent that I thought it might be a good time to have a chat.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's a
Should
great
we try
idea.
that? Let's start with our own little nuggets.
Yeah.
What have you got for us this time?
Well, it's kind of a generic thing. It's just my twins are doing public exams at the moment, and just watching how they approach them. And also, I've had one who's been through 2 lots of public exams, and it's the idea that yes, I'm nudging them and helping them and supporting them and holding space for them. And one of them loves being tested. Well, doesn't love. They don't love any of it. Would like me to test them, and so we've spent a long time testing and finds that really helpful. The other one doesn't, only bits, and has they're just very different in their approaches. And I think my point is, and very different from their brother was, that we can do a lot. We can really do a lot, and they're really different in their approaches. I think we need to remember that it's not all us.
And I think that's such an important point, because likewise,
Yeah.
And if you have one child, or this is your first child, and you look over the fence at someone else and you think, wait, they're doing this with their child, but my child won't accept that, or I'm not doing it right. It's not that.
Yeah, and then we go, oh, I'm doing it wrong, or
Yes,
I haven't done
exactly.
enough, or I've done too much, or something,
Exactly.
and it's probably coming from the kid. But
Yes.
it's a dance, isn't it? It's
Yes.
like dipping in and out and trying different things, but they are very different. And I have twins; it's super obvious because they're doing exactly the same at exactly the same moment, and they're approaching it very differently.
Yeah, and that's really helpful for people listening. And I think same with mine. Mine's the one that's doing the GCSEs at the moment does not want me helping.
No.
What I do is I scaffold all the revision time. I make sure she's up. I make sure she's eating. I make sure that she does some exercise, and I keep the phone away. I'm doing those things, but the rest of it, she doesn't want me to intervene. Fine.
Yeah.
That's, you can only do what they want.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, my nugget is about one of my daughters who told me the other day that she was feeling really depressed, and nothing she normally does was lifting her spirits.
Right.
I wanted to mention this because I think depression is one of those things that parents worry about.
Yes.
I empathized with her, first of all, and said, yeah, that sounds really hard.
Yeah.
But then I said, actually, that happens to me sometimes, much less now than when I was a teenager. And I think when we're teenagers, there are a lot of hormonal things going on that will impact the way you feel anyway. I then asked her about her sleep patterns. She wasn't getting enough sleep. I don't want to peg it to that, but I said, that's not going to help, is
No,
it?
it doesn't help.
It's much harder to regulate your emotions if you're not getting enough sleep. And she has been working very, very hard on her exam revision. And she also has a big event coming up, which was very exciting. So I think we were talking about, which you mentioned a long time ago, the window of regulation, and that we can either be... Yes, exactly. And you can be above where you get hyper and you get angry or you get overexcited. But you can also dip below it where your body just goes, your mind goes, no, I've had enough.
Yeah, hyper and hypo.
Hypo. And I said to her, I think you've been in your head so much that you're kind of dipped underneath where you are regulated, and you're just not able to pull yourself out of it with just the normal things.
Yeah.
But I did say to her, she said that there was a tennis game that she could go to, and I said, go to that. When you leave your room, stop thinking about anything else, focus on the sunshine, focus on the feeling of your body moving, and just let everything else go and just try and enjoy the match. And actually it made all the difference.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're in our heads so much, and our poor teens are so much, they're either on social media, in their heads, and that physicality can make a big difference. I'm not saying it's a quick fix for everybody, but I'm just saying that there can be so many moving parts, and just being able to unpick it, first of all, makes them feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And knowing that they're not broken, but also finding something physical.
Yeah,
that's why we do sports, right?
Absolutely. And often it's the little tweaks that actually make the biggest difference. And you're really right with the hyper and hypoarousal, because sometimes we go straight into hypoarousal, which is the one where we feel heavy and lethargic, and it's hard to get out of that way. But sometimes if we're in hyperarousal, which is the stress response, well, they're both stress responses, but the hyper one, and we're in that for a long time, it's exhausting. We get burnt out, and then we dip into the
Exactly
exhausted
that.
one. And something that is maybe difficult for a teen to really have experienced yet because they're younger is that these things pass. They're normal. Like I think once we get to our ripe old age, like we've experienced feelings that, you have a dip and okay, feels a bit rubbish right now, but it will pass, it will move. And that's something I practice with my mindfulness thing. Nothing lasts forever. Whereas when you're experiencing it, when you're a teenager, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to feel like this forever. How do I get out of it?
So true, so true. And it's so important to understand the cycles of life. Yeah. And the earlier that they can start being able to vocalize that, the easier it will become. I'm going to mention a review. It was this morning while driving my stepson, bonus son, like you lovely say, to one of his GCSE exams. We listened to the FOMO episode. We both enjoyed it very much and it triggered a rich conversation between us. So thank you very much. He said he found the podcast super interesting and we will be listening to more of them together. Hurrah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the best bit, she said, it made the podcast super relatable was the mention of the rap drama.
Oh, yeah.
Between Drake and Kendrick. And she said she didn't even know about it, but her stepson, of course, knew and he explained all of it to her. Yeah. And she said, thank you for creating a special moment between us.
Oh, that's so cool.
Unique, isn't it? But actually, I wanted to mention that because if you have listened to any of the episodes with your teenager, please let us know if it landed well. Because what I'll do is I'll create a list because we've had... a friend of mine also said to me, she'd listened to the bikini episode with her daughters and it was amazing, the discussion that came out of it. I've had another listener who talked about, I think it was this one about sports that she'd done with her son. Oh, sleep. No, it was the sleep one that she'd listened to it. And then she went back and found the section where she sat and listened to it with him so that it came from somebody else. Yeah. So if you're doing that, do let us know because then we can help other listeners by saying these ones could be suitable for you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think maybe we should do some more.
I think
of those.
that's lovely that people listen to it with their kids.
Yes.
Mine won't listen to them. do you talk about us? Well, yeah, but only like stuff that I think you'd be all right with. Listen and you'll see. No, I can't be bothered.
Yeah, I think it's awkward, isn't it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I thought we'd start and possibly end this chat with a meaningful quote, and because it relates to a lot of the things that are coming up.
Meaningful quote.
It's by Viktor Frankl. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And the reason I thought about this quote when I was thinking about these different stories was the Work and Pensions Secretary in the UK, Mel Stride.
Oh, wasn't expecting you to go there.
Yeah. Well, wait for it.
Okay.
Has argued that pornography and video games are fueling a mental health crisis among young men, causing them to leave the workforce.
Wow.
So he's saying that's why people are leaving the workforce. Okay. And he was talking to the Work and Pension Select Committee. And he says, yes, women's mental health has been impacted by unrealistic standards of beauty, but it's the things like gaming and pornography that are impacting the guys. Now, the reason he brought this up is because the Office for National Statistics recently gave the figures for the period from January to March 2024, showing that 900,000 young people between 16 and 24 are classified as NEET. Have you heard that acronym?
Yeah, but not in this context.
Not in education, employment, or training.
No, something completely different.
No, not that one. And this is an increase of 88,000 from the previous year.
Wow.
So these are. So I interviewed Ken Rabo the last episode, and he talked to. These are the people he's talking about, the young adults who actually are failing to launch. Yeah, and he talked through the way that he picks apart what's going on. And but this guy, this secretary is saying it's this, not actually pointing out that they've had to deal with a global pandemic.
Yeah, it's very oversimplified.
It's yes. But it is a big number, right?
Yeah,
900,000 young men out of work. Yeah. And in contrast, there were 11,000 fewer young women out of work at the same time.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I don't know. I always go statistics. Like, that's such an oversimple. Like, there's never one reason for anything, is there? There must be a million reasons, and like
why this is happening.
Yeah, and maybe we start looking at the education system, and like there are a million reasons as to why that could be. I can't come with them, many of them now, but my reaction is always like, yeah, okay, and let's spread it out and unpack it properly.
Well, I just wonder because this whole question, coming back to that quote, the deep sense of meaning than distracting yourself. I wanted to bring this up because I've read a lot of books recently and talked to young men about the experience of leaving education. And the feedback I get is that there's a lot of structure in education and home life, not necessarily at home life, but there's structure.
Yeah.
And I've heard from kids who've gone to private schools who've had the most amazing opportunities, as well as kids who really haven't had many opportunities.
Yeah.
And the one thing I hear a lot of from boys in particular is they leave education and then there's no structure and they just are not equipped for like, how do I move on in the world? How do I do this thing?
Yes, and
that is
stepping stones in place, for the transition.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do wonder about that. And I wonder whether the way our society works is not giving enough cues and ideas for how you find these jobs. Are we not giving them enough work experience, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense when I think about the way we parent now. I mean, obviously I've only parented in this era, but from what I've heard and read, like, we are very different with our kids, aren't we? We parent very differently. We're much more, I don't know how you want to explain it, in their faces. We are their structure very much more. And of course, there's a massive spectrum of how that looks. But and then suddenly we go, oh, off you go.
Yes.
Whereas maybe before there was more of a gentle transition, you know, kids were less, you know, they don't have a lot of free space, these teenagers, you know, growing up, and they are structured, and suddenly it's gone. And then I imagine for some of them that's a bit overwhelming. For some of them it's probably lovely, but for those who need that structure and are reliant on it, then maybe it's more of a step than it used to be. I don't know, I'm just spouting from my hip.
I think that's absolutely one of the problems. And I think that I had a paper round about the age of 13, and I very quickly went on to being a waitress. And you know, and I worked in a fish and chip shop, and I worked in a cafe at the weekends for free, just because I wanted to, you know, it was a church cafe, because I wanted to have something to do. And a lot of that's gone for these kids, and I think that also doesn't give them a sense of, okay, the way to do this is you know, I've been talking to my daughters about going and getting work, and they're a bit kind of, well, how does that work? And I just go, get a CV, go and meet the manager, go to this place, turn up,
very good
ask
skills.
to meet the manager. But it's hard.
It's hard, and maybe it's, you know, that's one aspect of it, isn't it? Getting a job and getting into the workplace as a teenager, that's one part of it.
One part of it.
There's also just like general structure of your life, like you know, I think we manage our kids and our kids' times, even if we think we don't, in a way that other generations just haven't done. You know, we are in their faces in a different way, and there's loads of positives to that. You know, we're closer in a different way, and you know, we hang out with our kids more. Not everybody, I'm aware that, you know, it's very different. It depends on your family and what you want and what the kids are like. But we probably hang out with our kids more than we used to. You know, kids used to just go off and do their own thing, and they don't anymore for lots and lots of different reasons. And so therefore the contrast is just bigger, and I imagine for some that's overwhelming.
Yeah, and Ken Rabo said, you know, he mentioned helicopter parents, and he said, I'll meet your kids later. Those are the ones that I end up working with. So that was a bit of a, okay. I mean, and we will talk about this in another episode, because I've been listening to the most amazing book that I've now bought, and I'm reading through it. And it's about executive function in teenagers and how to spot when there's missing executive function, and how to support them to build those skills so that they then can do it. Because some kids figure this stuff out. For some, it takes a lot more work, and you can help them. But it's about sort of just tweaking it and then getting them to do it themselves, rather than us being too close to the coalface.
And we now know
and filling in.
People's brains are very, very different. I also think that there is a balance, and sometimes we don't get it right, myself included, of you know, we are maybe more for our kids now in a different way, because we know most people know maybe a bit more about, you know, the psychology behind parenting, or just little snippets. It's in it's in mainstream media, and we want to be there for them. We want to nurture them. We want to really be present, because we know that's really important, especially for later in life. You know, we have a relationship forever. It's not just until they leave home. We know more, so we want to do that. And then the one you talked about, helicopter parenting, and sometimes we confuse them, and they're not the same thing. So, you know, nurturing and being there so that we create a secure attachment, so that they can fly because we've created this security through love and presence and all of those things, is not the same as helicopter parenting, where we are, smoothing the way for them so that we make them unable to function in the world.
That's bulldozer parenting.
Bulldozer, yeah.
The helicopter is looking over their shoulder all the time, and the bulldozer is going in front of them and clearing the path.
Yeah, they're similar, though, aren't they?
They're similar.
They overlap.
You're just too involved, and you're not giving them the chance to actually learn the skills. And I've seen lots of debates with parents where, one parent has said, "Oh, my kid forgot their swimming costume," so I just said, "Well, you'll just have to go with natural consequences." And other parents are saying that's a horrific thing to do. They need to know that you're there for them. And it's where do you go? And my response was, well, what I do is I have checklists. So I've told my child how to create checklists. I then remind them when that we're leaving the home. If they then don't have it, I say, well, consequences come in, because there's only so much picking up you should be doing. You do need to teach them how to do these things, but then you need to stand back and say, well.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I think it's moment by moment and kid by kid. Sure. I don't actually have rules for that. I do, okay, in this moment, okay, I can see you really, this is really important to you, so I'm going to maybe do what I wouldn't have done last week. It's picking it. But there is a difference, I think, between those two things. For sure. Yeah.
And so leading on from that, Rishi Sunak, who's the Prime Minister in the UK at the moment, just for a little while longer probably, has suddenly come out and said, if the Conservatives get in next time, national service will be a promise that they are going to get, 18-year-olds?
Yes.
National service for all 18-year-olds, with teenagers required to either volunteer in their local community or take a full-time role in the armed forces.
Yeah, for 6 months, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, so the community volunteering, it would require them to spend 1 weekend a month volunteering for 1 year.
For a year, okay.
So 25 days in total.
Yeah.
That's pretty much, my daughters have been doing Duke of Edinburgh and they pretty much have to do that. So they've done litter picking, which was a real revelation to them. And they've become much more conscientious about the environment around them as a result. And they all think everyone should do litter picking, which I do. I walk my dogs and people chuck stuff into the beautiful countryside out of their car windows. And every 2 weeks I'll take a litter picker with a black plastic bag and I'll pick it all up. But someone's got to do it, right? Okay, so, and then military training, it would be 30,000 teenagers would be able to take up places to spend a year full-time in the armed forces. Young adults would need to apply for the programme and tests would be used to select the best candidates. It would not involve combat. What do we think?
Oh, I don't know.
My younger daughter was like, oh, she crossed her arms. She said, well, he'll definitely lose now. And the other one went, but the people who will be voting Conservatives are old. They will be going, yeah, we think national service is great. And the young people who are 16 don't get to vote.
Yeah. Or unless Labour get in.
Yes, it's true. That's another thing. If you're not in this country, you won't know this, but Labour is now saying that they want 16-year-olds to have the vote.
Yeah. Well, my kids, my 16-year-olds, I haven't spoken to my 19-year-old about it because he's not at home at the moment. I've spoken to one of them particularly anyway, and he thinks it's a terrible idea, and he doesn't want to be doing it, and he's completely outraged, like your daughter, about it. I don't know. I think enforcing these things is always really problematic, isn't it? I think that's the bit we balk at. I think most people would agree with a bit of community service is never going to be a bad thing. Like picking up litter, who could argue against that? I mean, really. And making people do it for a whole year is the bit we don't like. We don't like being told. But
particularly the British, we're quite determined,
especially
not to be told.
If it's a new thing, like if you've been doing it forever, and also then the feeling of that's unfair.
They didn't have
to do it. Why do I have to do that for 25 Saturdays a week or whatever it is? I think that's the issue.
Now, just for background, Sweden, everyone between the ages of 16 and 70 living in Sweden is part of the country's total defence. Right. There are 3 types of total defence service in Sweden: conscription, civilian service, and general compulsory national service.
Which is always really interesting, isn't it? Because Sweden is supposedly very pacifist and not, and the opposite of what we would think was a military country.
Yep. And Russia, all men in Russia are currently required to complete 12 months of military service or equivalent training during higher education from the age of 18.
Which maybe isn't so surprising, considering they have a different way of being.
But they cannot legally be deployed to fight outside Russia.
Okay, interesting.
Norway, 19 to 44-year-olds are obliged to complete 19 months of military service.
Yep.
Denmark, conscription in Denmark is mandatory for all physically fit men over the age of 18.
Is it?
The country has 4,700 conscripts. Has it? They abolished it.
Well, actually, do you know what? I haven't lived there for years. They did have it, then they abolished it. Maybe they brought it back in again. I don't know. I couldn't speak for that.
France is an interesting... Wait, China recently, in fact, I think it was last week, I was looking at the Times newspaper, President Xi is said to fear that young people are losing their patriotic focus and young men their masculinity. So he said all high school pupils in China will be forced to undergo mandatory military service under a new law on defence education. Ooh. Yeah, and the law, which will end a nationwide debate over whether it's already a common practice, also proposes drills for middle school pupils aged 12 to 15 and says that defence education should be part of a syllabus even for primary school children.
Ooh,
finally, France. So that's the closest nation to us. French President Emmanuel Macron implemented universal national service in 2021 aimed at 15 to 17-year-olds, and it's supposed to encourage young French citizens to develop their role in society. And it's 12-day residential stay and 84 hours of voluntary work at a local authority. But guess what? Yesterday, papers. France's national service scheme beset by drugs and disorder.
Oh.
And there have been reports of fights and sexual assaults among teens volunteering. So President Macron's had to delay making the scheme mandatory. Right, it's not that simple. So we can sit there and say, we're going to do this. We're going to make them all. But actually, trying to implement these things can be very tricky.
Yeah, and we're going into an election and it's all a bit...
Yes, but so it's not simple.
No, it's not simple. And, it is... The world is changing, isn't it? And there's been a lot of mumbling about, what do we need to do to be ready if anything should happen. And there's a million different opinions on that, aren't there? Depending on where you stand on all of it. And, we're going into an election, so let's chuck this one into
But I do wonder...
It's an interesting topic, though.
I do wonder the extent to which we parents are doing enough to talk to our kids about being in a society. And what I mean by that... That's a part of it.
That's away from the military side of it, isn't it?
Away from the military side of it.
That's different.
I think it's actually vitally important that we parents talk to our kids about the fact that the reason we can walk down streets safely, hopefully we can, that we can, go into the countryside and it's not full of litter and, all the things that the rubbish gets taken away. All of these things, whether we're wealthy or poor, we rely on a structure and a society to do things for us. Not all of that is done by our taxes. We all say, we pay our taxes. Yeah. A lot of people are relying on charitable donations and work done by people who are just giving their time. And we need to be stressing that we should respect society for what it offers us, and we need to give back. Yeah, I'm a believer in that. I think it's important.
There is a maybe it's a human response thing that, if we think somebody is responsible for doing something, then we stop doing it.
Yes.
So, if we think somebody is going to tidy up after us, then we go, then they'll do it.
Yes.
And we don't pick up anything, or we don't do anything because we think, it's covered, it's done. And then when something does happen, we think, some responsible person in charge will do it.
Yeah, and who's that responsible person?
And maybe it's us.
Maybe it's us. And that I say that to my kids all the time. I just say, you have to walk through this world offering back as much, if not more, than you're taking out of it. We need to be stressing this to our kids so that they have purpose in life and they feel good when they do things. They might moan about it and go, but actually, when we do take a bag and pick up litter, they're like, look what I got. And, it's a big bag. So you just say, look what you did today to contribute back. Yeah. It's great.
And the next time one of their mates maybe chucks something, they'll go, hey, you pick that up. I don't want to do that next week with my mum.
Correct. Exactly, because it feeds out, right? Yeah. And on the just coming back to the military service, but also actually boys, because I think boys are there are a couple of bits in the press that I wanted to talk about. One of them was there's a Twitter teacher who talks a lot about boys. It's called Mr. Pink on Twitter, if you want to find him. And he talks a lot about masculinity. And he said that someone had asked him, it was a female teacher, what should I say if a boy says, what the Sigma in my class? Now, for people who don't know what Sigma means, they're just going to shrug and go, I don't understand why that's an issue. And he said, well, look, it's no different from saying what the heck. Because a lot of these kids don't actually know what it really means anyway. In the same way that when I was in a hairdresser and this girl went, just said, oh, bugger that. And I said, do you know what that word actually means? And she didn't. So he said, actually, if someone said that, I'd probably just ignore it and then later on take them to one side and say, do you understand that that word is linked to some pretty creepy ideas and views? And so let's go to what that means, because a lot of people don't know. So it comes from incel culture. And what they do is they have created this sort of misguided mythology about what men are, and they are categorized. And there's the alpha male, and then the sigma male is an alpha male. So he's one that's at the top, but he's quiet. He's a silent figure. As opposed to one of the alpha boasting guys, right? And then they have ridiculous things like beta, gamma, omega males. And these are all placed towards the bottom of the hierarchy. And this entire made up hierarchy confines young men. It makes them think, oh, I'm only this. So the damaging side of it is that we're not allowing boys to have a full expression of who they are as a human being. And that's why it's worth talking to our sons about what this means and why it's not a good thing to think. It's not a good way to think, and it's not helpful, and actually it's wrong. Yeah,
but maybe the point for the question was, and the teacher is saying that, if we make it into a really big deal in the moment, it doesn't need to be.
Let it go.
My daughter I don't think she really understands the context of it. She may do. We haven't really spoken about it in depth. I don't want to make out that she doesn't know what it means, but my impression was she didn't, and she's like, it's not a big deal. It's just like calling someone an idiot. But it's important to know what it means. It's important to know. Important, but to do it in a way that is appropriate and not make... It's a bit like when a toddler swears for the first time, isn't it? And we'll go, oh my goodness, oh gosh, and laugh or freak out. And then it's a way bigger deal than it needs to be and has a context for.
Absolutely. But I do think, I mentioned it and my daughter said, oh, I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So it does get bandied around. So it's worth just addressing it so that your boy can see that actually, because he may not, if he hasn't had an adult in the room saying, just so you know, that this is a really confining way to think about yourself as a man, and that's not necessary. You can think about yourself as a really multi-layered, complex human being, which you are.
Yeah.
Right?
It's worth having that knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And staying on the boys, bigorexia, it's come up again. Apparently, there's been a lot more talk about it because on TikTok, there's a huge amount of young men who are flexing muscles and they get more, they get fed out on the algorithm much more quickly.
Right.
And so your son might be gaming or interested in something else, and then they get this feed. It targets boys. And as a parent, you could end up thinking, well, this is great. My son, who hasn't been doing anything, is now going to the gym. Yeah. It's amazing. If you talk to teenage boys, a lot of them are saying, well, now it's a flex. You need to be going to the gym. You need to be big to feel like you're a male, a man. My husband was one of those skinny boys who grew really quickly and would never have put on muscle, no matter how much he ate. He just couldn't. And I said to him, how would you feel if you were growing up in an environment where it was so predominant? He said, it's hard.
Yeah. So it is hard, and I think I spoke to my daughter really briefly about this yesterday, and in her opinion, and she's obviously not a boy, she doesn't see it that much, and maybe I think it depends as well. So sometimes, we hear these stories, don't we, in the news, and it's like the new awful thing that's going to destroy every teenage boy in the world. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. So we also need to kind of, how much is it prevalent? It is definitely prevalent. And I spoke to her and I said, yeah, but in my generation, nobody would have been like muscly and in that way, unless they were doing sport or physical work that made them become that way. It wouldn't be there wouldn't be the intention to get muscles just for the sake of having muscles. And so it is different. It has changed. She was like, oh, okay, that is a difference. But she, that maybe, I don't know. I think just keeping an eye on it, isn't it? If it becomes obsessive, then that's not a good thing. But how rampant it is, I don't know. Maybe
Well, one of the things they were saying was that the problem is there are boys who are using IDs to get into gyms under the age, and they're not actually being given proper training.
That's dangerous for them.
So they could actually damage things. It's not just about whether you're building muscle. It's actually, are you pulling soft tissues or things that are going to cause problems in long term? Slip discs, all those things. Because actually, if you're pulling a lot of weight and you've got your mates around you jeering you on, then that can be really problematic.
It's really dangerous for young bodies to be doing too many weights. That's absolutely no contest. And maybe, for some people it really is a problem and it's a real issue and a sort of almost an addiction, isn't it? I think we spoke about that in an episode. It's really not a good idea, but maybe it's, I don't know. Not everybody's doing it. No. I just wanted to flag it up because it has come up again. Yeah. We've done a piece on boys eating everything and bigorexia just to kind of highlight it. And highlighting, and actually I read that body dysmorphic disorder has one of the highest suicide rates of all the mental health conditions. Yes, it has.
In these young,
eating disorders.
Yes, and so parents, ask these questions. If you think your teenager might have a problem, is the gym preventing them from spending time with their friends and family? It's the same thing with screen time. Is this taking you away from other healthy things?
That's
Are they spending excessive amounts of time exercising or exercising when injured? And are they feeling distressed if they can't go and exercise? And one guideline I saw was that it should be 2 to 3 days a week, not 5-6 days a week. How strict is their gym diet? Does it cause distress if they have to deviate from it? Again, we've talked about this before. If you fixate on one thing, then that's a little bit of a red flag. It's quite a big red flag, right? And also, has the gym habit grown really quickly? Because if it has, that's also an indication that it's being fed by something. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I just wanted to bring this up again.
Yeah, no, it's really
because
important.
It's back in the news, and I think that it's worth being aware so that we can ask questions, engage, and try and help them before it becomes ingrained. Because as we've said before, it's really hard when a kid looks really healthy, or they've switched from a sort of sedentary lifestyle to doing something like that. You think, oh, this is great. Yeah. And we may not spot.
No,
when
just being aware when is it tipped over, because it's not really particularly natural for them to have these massive muscles and, be obsessing about it. That's not natural.
Absolutely. That's it.
Oh.
I don't have any other things that I want to particularly talk about.
You said we were going to end on a quote. Have you still got it?
Oh, no, it's the same quote. It's that quote. Let's go back again. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure.
I don't see anything wrong with distracting myself with pleasure.
No, but it's
I'm kidding.
But I think it's this sense that the distraction side of it. Yeah. So my daughter will tell me that if she ends up sort of stuck on social media, she has actually said to me, Mummy, it's because I just don't feel great.
Yeah.
And the feeling great, I think, often comes from having purpose, having something that you feel is important and you're worthwhile and you're useful. And
I was just being flippant, but I would question that that's not pleasure, is it? Pleasure is, wholehearted, really enjoying something.
I agree.
Distraction is numbing.
No.
It's very different.
So maybe it should be they distract themselves with distractions.
Yeah. But I would really not want to be re-quoting Viktor Frankl because I think he's quite good. I wouldn't want to do that.
Well, this is
I'm going to let him have his quote.
We can do what we want. You know that, right?
I think he's a bit smarter. So I'm going to leave
it. Okay. You win, Victor. If you found this useful, hand it on to someone else. You can just press, get on your WhatsApp and just say, hey, have you listened to this one? It's a chit chat. Sometimes we do that. Most of the time we don't, but it's useful to have a bit of mix up. And sometimes there are things you want to mop up.
And there are things for our teens in our country in the news at the moment. It's really relevant.
Yes, absolutely.
Quite a lot.
Yes. And if you want any more information, if you want to contact me, it's teenagersuntangled@gmail.com. If you want to contact Susie, what's your email address?
Or my website is www.amindful-life.co.uk. You can find me on that.
Perfect. And if you want to sort of search through any back episodes or anything, it's www.teenagersuntangled.com. They're all on there. I've got a blog that I intermittently update. I think that's pretty much it.
So many W's we have.
Loads of W's. Yeah. What about the X, the Y's and the...
Nah, can't get to them. Too many W's in the way.
That's it for now.
Bye for now.